The moment Elena Ward shattered that porcelain cup, she shattered everything else too. Her anonymity, her safety, the invisible life she'd been clinging to for survival. Because the man whose table she ruined wasn't just anyone. Victor DeLuca didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. One look from him could end careers, lives, futures. And when his eyes locked on hers, bruised, starving, desperate, she knew with cold certainty that her life would never be small again. The question wasn't whether he'd ruin her. It was whether she'd survive what came next. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, not the gentle kind that whispered against windows or made the world feel clean. This was the punishing sort, heavy sheets that turned gutters into rivers and made the streets smell like rust and old garbage. It hammered the roof of Martelli's bakery with a rhythm that had become white noise to Elena Ward, who'd been on her feet for 11 hours and still had 2 more to go. Her hands ached, the kind of ache that went bone deep, that made her fingers feel like they belonged to someone else when she tried to grip the coffee pot. She'd burned herself twice already today, once on the ancient espresso machine that hissed like a dying animal, once on the edge of a baking sheet she'd pulled from the oven without thinking. The burns were small. They didn't matter. Nothing mattered except getting through the shift, collecting her pathetic paycheck, and figuring out how to stretch it across rent, utilities, and the debt collectors who called her aunt's phone at all hours. Her aunt. That was a bitter joke. Diane Ward had died 6 months ago, leaving Elena with nothing but a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled like cigarettes and a mountain of debt that somehow became her responsibility the moment they lowered the casket into the ground. "Table 9 needs a refill," Marco called from behind the counter, not looking up from his phone. He was the owner's nephew, which meant he did half the work Elena did and made twice the money. "And someone spilled sugar all over table 4. Clean it up." Elena didn't respond. There was no point. She grabbed the coffee pot with her raw, blistered hand and made her way through the maze of tables, her vision swimming slightly at the edges. When was the last time she'd eaten? Yesterday morning, maybe. A stale roll that Marco was going to throw out anyway. The bakery was busier than usual for a Wednesday evening. The rain always drove people inside, looking for warmth and caffeine and something to do besides stare at their phones. Elena moved through them like a ghost, invisible, forgettable, just another tired girl in a stained apron serving coffee to people who'd never remember her face. She refilled cups at table 9 without making eye contact, murmured something that might have been, "You're welcome," when one of them thanked her, and turned toward table 4. That's when she saw him. Table 7, corner spot. He'd been there for almost an hour, which was unusual. Most customers cycled through quickly, grab a coffee, maybe a pastry, then back out into the rain. But this man had ordered a single espresso and hadn't touched it, just sat there, perfectly still, reading something on his phone with an expression that gave away nothing. Elena had noticed him when he'd first walked in, mostly because everyone else had noticed him too. The whole bakery had gone briefly, unnaturally quiet. He was the kind of man who commanded attention without asking for it. Tall, dark hair, cut with precision, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Elena made in 6 months. But it wasn't the suit or the looks that made people stare. It was something else, an edge, a weight. The sense that this was someone you didn't want to cross. She'd been careful to avoid his table. Let Marco handle it. But Marco was on his phone and table 4's sugar situation was getting worse. Some kid had apparently upended an entire dispenser, and the only path to the cleaning supplies took her right past table 7. She kept her eyes down, moved quickly. Almost made it. "Excuse me." The voice stopped her mid-step. Low, controlled, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Not Italian, despite the name Martelli on the bakery sign. Something else. Eastern European, maybe. Elena turned slowly, gripping the coffee pot like a shield. "Yes?" He wasn't looking at his phone anymore. He was looking at her, and the directness of his gaze made her want to step backward. His eyes were dark. Not brown, something deeper, almost black, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "More coffee," he said. Not a question. "Of course." Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. She moved to his table, reached for his cup. The pot slipped. Later, she wouldn't be able to explain how it happened. Maybe her hands were shaking. Maybe the handle was wet. Maybe she was just so tired that her brain had stopped communicating properly with her body. But one second she was reaching for his espresso cup, and the next the coffee pot was tumbling from her grip, and she watched in horrifying slow motion as it struck the edge of the table, shattered, and sent a wave of hot coffee across the white tablecloth and onto his lap. The bakery went silent. Elena froze, her mind white with panic. The man, Victor, she'd heard Marco call him when he'd first arrived, didn't move, didn't flinch, just sat there as coffee soaked into his expensive suit, his expression unchanging. "I'm so..." Elena's voice cracked. "I'm so sorry. I didn't... Let me get something." She grabbed for the napkins on his table, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold them. This was it. This was how she lost her job. Marco was going to fire her, and she had exactly $43 in her bank account, and rent was due in 8 days, and stop! The word wasn't loud, but it cut through her spiral like a knife. Elena's hands stilled, napkins clutched uselessly, coffee dripping onto the floor. Victor was looking at her again. Really looking, like he could see past the stained apron and the exhaustion and the terror. His gaze dropped to her hands, and something changed in his expression, something she couldn't read. "You're hurt," he said. Elena blinked. "What?" "Your hands." He gestured slightly. "They're burned." She looked down automatically. The burns from earlier were angry and red against her pale skin, blistering in places. She'd forgotten about them. They barely registered anymore against everything else. "It's nothing," she said quickly. "Please, let me... I'll get you a towel. I'll pay for the dry cleaning." "How long have you been on your feet?" The question caught her off guard. What?" "Today." "How many hours?" Elena's throat felt tight. Why was he asking her this? Why wasn't he yelling? 11. Almost 12. Something flickered across his face. Anger, maybe, but not directed at her. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then stood. He was tall. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and when he stood this close, she could smell his cologne. Expensive. Everything about him was expensive. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena." It came out as barely a whisper. "Elena." He repeated it like he was testing the weight of it. "How old are you?" 18. His jaw tightened. "Do you have somewhere safe to go tonight?" The question was so unexpected that Elena actually laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Safe?" "Yes, safe." "Do you have family, friends, somewhere that isn't..." He gestured around the bakery, at the flickering lights and the water-stained ceiling, and Marco, who was watching them from the counter with his mouth hanging open. "This." "I have an apartment," Elena said defensively. Never mind that it was falling apart. Never mind the mold in the bathroom and the heat that barely worked, and the neighbors who screamed at each other until 3 in the morning. Victor studied her for a long moment. Then he did something that made absolutely no sense. He smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. There was something dark in it, something that made her stomach flip, but it transformed his face from merely handsome to devastating. "No," he said quietly, "you don't." Before Elena could process that, the bakery door opened and 2 men walked in. They weren't customers. She knew that immediately. They moved like Victor did, with purpose, with contained violence. They wore suits almost as nice as his, and when they approached the table, they didn't even glance at Elena. "Sir," one of them said. "The car is ready." Victor nodded. Then he turned back to Elena, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle in a way that somehow felt more dangerous than anger would have been. "You're going to go into the back room now. You're going to collect your things, and then you're going to leave through the rear exit where my driver is waiting. Do you understand?" Elena shook her head. I can't just leave. I have a shift." "Your shift is over. This establishment is closing." "Closing?" Marco's voice cracked across the bakery. He'd finally found the courage to approach, though he kept a careful distance from Victor. "What the hell are you talking about? You can't just..." Victor looked at him, just looked, with those dark, endless eyes. Marco went pale and took a step back. "As of 10 minutes ago," Victor said calmly, "I own this building. The bakery's lease is terminated effective immediately. You have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings before the locks are changed. The bakery erupted. Customers started talking all at once, chairs scraping against the floor as people stood. Marco was shouting something about lawyers and contracts, but his voice had a hysterical edge that said he already knew he'd lost. Elena couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Victor's attention shifted back to her, and the chaos around them seemed to fade into background noise. Elena, look at me. She did. She couldn't help it. I'm not going to hurt you, he said, and something in his voice made her want to believe him. But you need to trust me right now. Go get your things. My driver will take you somewhere safe. Why? The word burst out of her. Why would you do this? I don't even know you. Something complex moved across his face. But I know you. And that somehow was the most terrifying thing he'd said yet. So, the rear exit of Martelli's bakery opened onto a narrow alley that smelled like garbage and rain. Elena stood in the doorway, her pathetic collection of belongings shoved into a plastic grocery bag. A worn hoodie, a phone with a cracked screen, a water bottle, the $38 in tips she'd managed to collect over the past 2 weeks. A black car idled in the alley, sleek, expensive, windows tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. The driver stood beside it, holding an umbrella despite the narrow overhang that kept this section of the alley marginally dry. This was insane. She should run, turn around, push past the driver, lose herself in the rain-soaked streets. Victor DeLuca, whoever the hell he really was, didn't own her. He couldn't just decide her life was going to change because he felt like it. Except he'd already bought a building to close down her workplace. What else could he do? The driver opened the rear door. Miss Ward. Elena's heart stopped. How do you know my name? Mr. DeLuca briefed me. His voice was neutral, professional, like this was completely normal. Please. It's cold. She didn't get in the car. Where would you take me? Somewhere safe, as Mr. DeLuca promised. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I'm authorized to give. Elena's hands tightened on her plastic bag. What if I say no? What if I just walk away? The driver's expression didn't change. Then I would follow at a discreet distance to ensure your safety until Mr. DeLuca provides alternate instructions. That's... Elena's voice rose. That's not okay. You can't just follow people. Nevertheless, they stared at each other in the rain-heavy silence. Elena's mind raced through her options. She could go back to her apartment, but rent was due and she'd just lost her job. She could call who? She didn't have friends, didn't have family. Everyone who might have helped her once was gone or had given up on her aunt's chaos years ago. And there was something else, something she didn't want to admit. When Victor had looked at her in the bakery, really looked at her like she was a person instead of a ghost serving coffee, she'd felt something shift, like she'd been invisible her whole life and someone had finally turned on a light. If I get in this car, she said slowly, can I leave whenever I want? Yes. You're lying. No, Miss Ward. You'll be free to leave. Whether you'll want to is a different question. That should have scared her more than it did. Elena took a breath, looked at the rain, looked at the alley, looked at her future stretching out in every direction like a maze with no exit. She got in the car. The drive took 40 minutes, though Elena lost track of time staring out the window as the city transformed around her. The cramped, rundown streets she knew gave way to wider avenues, then to neighborhoods where the buildings had doormen and the sidewalks were actually clean. She'd been to this part of the city exactly once, on a school trip years ago, and remembered feeling like an alien visiting another planet. The car finally stopped in front of a building that looked less like an apartment complex and more like something from a movie about obscenely wealthy people, all glass and steel and sharp modern lines, with a curved driveway and actual trees planted in massive concrete planters. This is a hotel, Elena said. No, miss. This is Mr. DeLuca's residence. The driver opened her door. Elena didn't move. He lives here? This entire building? The top 3 floors, yes, please. He's waiting. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she thought about her apartment with its broken heat and suspicious stains, about the debt collectors and the empty refrigerator and the bone-deep exhaustion that had become her normal. And she thought about Victor's voice saying, "I know you like." It was a promise and a threat wrapped together. Elena got out of the car. The lobby was obscene. Marble floors, a chandelier that probably cost more than most houses, abstract art on the walls that Elena suspected might be famous if she knew anything about art. A concierge stood behind a desk of dark wood and chrome, and he smiled at her like she belonged here, like she wasn't wearing a stained apron and carrying her life in a plastic bag. "Miss Ward, welcome. Mr. DeLuca is expecting you." The elevator was glass on three sides, offering a dizzying view as it climbed. Elena watched the city shrink below her and wondered distantly if this was what drowning felt like. That sense of being pulled under, of losing control, of the surface getting farther away with every second. The doors opened onto a private foyer, and there, waiting, was Victor. He'd changed out of his coffee-stained suit into dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. It should have made him look casual, but somehow it just made him look more dangerous, like he was barely contained. "Elena," he said her name like he'd been saying it for years. "Come in." She didn't move. "What is this? What do you want from me?" "I want to talk. That's all." "That's not all. You bought a building. You closed down the bakery. You had your driver follow me. That's not just talking." A slight smile touched his mouth. "You're right. I apologize. Let me be more precise. I want to talk, and then I want to offer you a choice." "What choice?" "Come inside and I'll explain." Elena's fingers were white-knuckled on her plastic bag. Every logical part of her brain was screaming that this was wrong, that she should leave, that nothing good could come from walking into this man's home. But there was another part, smaller, quieter, desperate, that whispered maybe this was her chance. Maybe this was the universe finally throwing her a rope instead of a stone. She stepped inside. The apartment was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, rain streaming down the glass in patterns that caught the light. The furniture was all clean lines and expensive materials, the kind of place that looked like a photo from a magazine. Everything was perfect. Everything was controlled, just like Victor. He gestured to a couch near the windows. "Sit, please. Are you hungry?" The question caught her off guard. "What? When did you last eat?" Elena's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. Her face heated. "That's none of your business. Humor me. Yesterday? Maybe? I don't remember." Something dark crossed his face. He pulled out his phone, sent a text. "Food will be here in 20 minutes. "I don't need—" "Yes, you do." His voice was firm but not cruel. "Sit, Elena. Let me explain why you're here." She sat, mostly because her legs were shaking. Victor took a chair across from her, close enough that she could see the exact moment his expression shifted from controlled to something raw. "I'm going to tell you something that will frighten you," he said. "I need you to stay and listen. Can you do that?" Elena's mouth was dry. "Depends on what you say." "Fair." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, and when he looked at her, his eyes held something that made her breath catch. "I've been watching you for 3 years." The world tilted. "What?" "Since you were 15. Since the first time I saw you walking home from school in the rain, no umbrella, no coat, looking like the world had already chewed you up and spit you out." His voice was steady, factual, like he was describing the weather. "I've been watching you since then." Elena stood up so fast she knocked over her plastic bag. You're insane. That's insane. Sit down." No, I'm leaving. Elena." He didn't raise his voice, but something in it stopped her. "I said I've been watching. I didn't say I've been hurting. There's a difference." "There's no difference. That's stalking. You're right. It is. And I won't apologize for it." He stood as well, and suddenly the space between them felt charged. "Do you know who I am? Really know?" "Some rich guy who buys buildings on a whim." "I'm the man who made sure your aunt's debt collectors stopped calling last year. I'm the man who paid your heating bill every winter so you wouldn't freeze. I'm the man who's been leaving cash in your tip jar when you weren't looking because you were too stubborn to accept help directly." Elena's world was spinning. "That's not You didn't. Check your tip jar history. Check your utility bills. I can show you receipts if you need proof. He took a step closer. I've been protecting you, Elena, for 3 years. Because the moment I saw you, I knew. Knew what? The words came out as a whisper. That you were mine. She should run, should scream, should do literally anything except stand there staring at him, while her heart did complicated things in her chest. But she couldn't move. Couldn't think past the impossible weight of what he'd just said. You're crazy, she managed. Probably. He smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. But I'm also the only reason you're still alive. What the hell does that mean? Your aunt owed money to people who don't forgive debt. When she died, they were going to come after you, make you work it off. Do you understand what I'm saying? Elena's blood went cold. You're lying. I'm not. They were planning to grab you 6 months ago. I made sure they couldn't. I bought the debt, all of it, and then I erased it. Why, Bam? Her voice cracked. Why would you do any of this? Victor moved closer, and Elena could smell his cologne again, could see the absolute certainty in his eyes. Because you needed me, and because I've been waiting 3 years to do what I'm about to do now. What? She barely got the word out. Ask you to marry me. The room spun. Elena's knees buckled, and Victor caught her before she could fall, his hands strong and steady on her arms. She looked up at him, at this stranger who claimed to know everything about her, who'd been watching her, protecting her, controlling her life without her knowledge. You're insane, she whispered. I'm patient, he corrected. There's a difference. I've waited 3 years for you to be old enough, to be ready, to need me enough to say yes. I'm not going to say yes. This is crazy. You're crazy. Maybe. His thumb brushed against the burn on her hand, so gentle it almost didn't hurt. But you're here, aren't you? You got in the car. You came inside. You're still standing here listening instead of running. Because I'm scared. No. Because part of you wants this too. Elena jerked back, but his hands tightened on her arms. Not painfully, just firmly, keeping her there, keeping her from running. Let me go, she said. Not yet. Not until you hear the offer. I don't want... Marry me, Elena. Become my wife. In exchange, I'll give you everything. Safety, security, a life where you never have to wonder where your next meal comes from or whether you can afford heat in the winter. A life where you matter. I matter now. Do you? His voice was soft, devastating. When was the last time someone saw you? Really saw you? Not the girl serving coffee, not the invisible thing people look past. You. Elena's eyes burned. She would not cry, would not give him that. I see you, Victor continued. I've always seen you. That's why I've been waiting. That's why I closed the bakery. That's why you're here. Because I'm done watching from a distance. I want you here. With me. Where you belong. I don't belong to anyone. Then why are you shaking? She was. She realized it suddenly. Her whole body was trembling, and not entirely from fear. There was something else. Something that felt dangerously like relief. Like she'd been underwater her whole life, and someone had finally offered her air. This is insane, she said again, but weaker this time. Yes. Victor's hand slid up to cup her face, tilting her head back so she had to meet his eyes. But you're going to say yes anyway. Do you know why? Why? Because you're tired of being invisible. Because you're tired of surviving instead of living. Because part of you has been waiting for someone to see you the way I do. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Because you felt it too, in the bakery. That pull, that recognition, like some part of you already knew me. Elena wanted to deny it, but she couldn't, because he was right. When their eyes had met across that coffee-stained table, something had shifted. Something had clicked into place in a way that terrified her. I need time, she whispered. How much time? I don't know, not forever. Just, I need to think. This is too much. Victor studied her for a long moment. Then he released her, stepped back, and she immediately felt the loss of his warmth. You'll stay here tonight, he said. It wasn't a question. I have guest rooms. Take whichever one you like. Food will arrive soon. Tomorrow morning we'll talk again. But Elena... He waited until she looked at him. I'm not giving you time to say no. I'm giving you time to understand that yes is the only answer that makes sense. You can't just decide that. Watch me. And the terrifying thing was, she believed him. Sat. The guest room was bigger than her entire apartment. King bed with sheets that probably cost more than her monthly salary. A bathroom with heated floors and a shower that had more settings than her phone. Elena stood in the middle of it all, still clutching her plastic bag, feeling like she'd stepped into someone else's life. There was a knock at the door. She jumped. "Miss Ward? May I come in?" Not Victor's voice. Elena cracked the door open to find a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor holding several shopping bags. "I'm Margaret," the woman said. "Mr. DeLuca asked me to bring you some clothes. I hope they fit. I had to guess your size." Elena stared at the bags. Designer labels, expensive fabrics. "I can't accept these. Mr. DeLuca will be very disappointed if you sleep in your work clothes." "I don't care what he—" Elena stopped, took a breath. "I'm sorry, thank you, but I can't take these." Margaret's expression softened. "May I offer some advice, Miss Ward?" "I guess." "Mr. DeLuca is a difficult man. He's used to getting what he wants. But he's also the most loyal person I've ever known. If he's decided to protect you, he'll do it whether you accept these clothes or not. You might as well be comfortable." "He told you." "About—" Elena gestured vaguely. "Everything. I've worked for him for 15 years. I know how he thinks. And I know he doesn't do anything without a reason." Margaret set the bags just inside the door. "There's food waiting for you downstairs if you're hungry, or I can bring it here if you'd prefer privacy." "Here. Please." Margaret nodded and left. Elena closed the door, leaned against it, and finally let herself slide to the floor. The tears came then, hot and angry and confused. She cried for her aunt, for the debt that had poisoned her life, for the years of being invisible. She cried because a stranger had been watching her, protecting her, shaping her life without her knowledge. She cried because part of her was grateful for it, and that gratitude felt like betrayal. Eventually, the tears stopped. Elena pulled herself together, washed her face in the obscene bathroom, and changed into one of the outfits Margaret had brought. Soft pants and a sweater that felt like a cloud. Everything fit perfectly. Of course it did. Victor had probably known her size before she'd known his name. The food arrived, pasta in a cream sauce that tasted like heaven, fresh bread, salad, and a slice of chocolate cake that made her want to cry again. Elena ate until she was uncomfortably full, until the hollow ache in her stomach finally eased. Then she sat by the window and looked out at the city, at the rain still falling, at the lights of a world she'd never been part of. Victor's words echoed in her head. "You're mine. You've always been mine." It should have terrified her. It did terrify her, but underneath the fear was something else. Something that whispered maybe being seen, being claimed, being wanted by someone who'd moved heaven and earth to protect her. Maybe that wasn't the worst thing that could happen. Maybe it was the thing she'd been waiting for all along. Elena pressed her palm against the glass and watched the rain fall, and tried to figure out when exactly her life had stopped being hers and started being his. The answer, she suspected, was 3 years ago. She just hadn't known it until tonight. And now that she did know, now that the invisible walls of his protection had become visible, undeniable, she had to decide what to do about it. The logical choice was to run. Get out of this apartment, disappear into the city, start over somewhere he couldn't find her. But she knew with cold certainty that there was nowhere she could go that Victor DeLuca couldn't follow. He'd been watching her for 3 years. He knew her patterns, her habits, her life. Running would be pointless. Besides, and this was the thought that kept circling back, the one she couldn't shake, where would she run to? Back to her moldy apartment? Back to minimum wage jobs that ground her into dust? Back to being invisible? Victor had looked at her like she mattered, like she was the most important thing in the room, in his world, maybe in his whole life. When was the last time anyone had looked at her like that? Elena closed her eyes and let herself imagine it, being his wife, living in this impossible apartment, never worrying about money or safety or whether she'd eat tomorrow, being seen, being wanted, being his. It felt like a trap and a rescue wrapped together so tightly she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. "Tomorrow morning," he'd said, They talk tomorrow. Elena pulled herself away from the window, climbed into the enormous bed, and pulled the expensive sheets up to her chin. Sleep should have been impossible, but exhaustion won out over anxiety, and her eyes drifted closed. Her last thought before darkness took her was of Victor's hands on her face, his voice promising her everything, and the terrifying realization that she wanted to believe him. Elena woke to sunlight cutting through unfamiliar windows and the disorienting sensation of sheets that didn't smell like mildew. For 3 confused seconds, she thought she was dreaming. Then memory crashed back. The bakery, the shattered cup, Victor's dark eyes telling her she'd been his for 3 years without knowing it. She sat up too fast, head spinning. The clock on the nightstand read 9:47 a.m. She never slept past 6, never had the luxury. There was a note on the bedside table written in sharp, precise handwriting. Breakfast is waiting downstairs. Take your time. We'll talk when you're ready. V. Elena crumpled the note in her fist. The presumption of it. Like he owned her mornings now, too. Except he kind of did, didn't he? She was in his apartment, wearing clothes he'd bought, having slept better than she had in months, because for the first time in years she hadn't gone to bed hungry and terrified. She hated how good it felt. The bathroom was still obscene in the morning light. Elena showered because she needed to think, and the water pressure was so perfect it was almost offensive. When was the last time she'd had hot water that didn't sputter out after 3 minutes? She washed her hair with shampoo that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget, and tried to figure out what the hell she was going to say to the man who'd been orchestrating her life, like she was a character in a story only he could read. The clothes Margaret had brought included jeans that fit like they'd been tailored, and a soft gray sweater that made Elena look almost pretty in the mirror. She stared at her reflection, still too thin, dark circles under her eyes that one good night's sleep couldn't erase, but cleaner than she'd looked in months, almost like a different person. Maybe that was the point. She found the stairs and followed them down to an open-concept kitchen and dining area that looked like something from a home design show. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, appliances that probably had more computing power than her phone. And there, at the dining table, was Victor. He'd been reading something on his tablet, but he looked up the moment she appeared. His gaze swept over her, quick, assessing, and something in his expression softened. You slept well. It wasn't a question. Elena bristled anyway. How would you know? You look less like you're about to collapse. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Margaret made enough food to feed 10 people. The table was covered with options. Eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, pastries that smelled like they'd just come out of an oven, coffee in a French press, orange juice in an actual glass pitcher. Elena's stomach growled traitorously. She sat, mostly because standing felt like giving him some kind of victory. We need to talk. We will, after you eat. I'm not hungry. Victor raised an eyebrow. You're a terrible liar, Elena. Stop doing that. Stop acting like you know me. I do know you. That's the part you're having trouble accepting. He poured coffee into a cup and slid it across to her. Eat. Then we'll talk about whatever you want. Elena wanted to refuse out of principle, but the coffee smelled incredible, and the pastries were still warm, and she'd learned a long time ago that pride was expensive when you were poor. She took the coffee, then a croissant, then some eggs because they were there, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd had eggs that weren't from a gas station. Victor watched her eat with an expression that made her uncomfortable. Not predatory exactly, more like satisfaction, like watching her take care of herself was somehow rewarding for him. Stop staring at me, she muttered. I've been waiting 3 years to see you eat breakfast in my home. Forgive me for enjoying it. Elena set down her fork. That's not normal. You know that's not normal, right? I never claimed to be normal. That's not reassuring. It's honest. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. Ask me anything. I'll answer truthfully. Why me? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Victor didn't flinch. You want the romantic answer or the real one? I want the truth. The truth is I don't entirely know. He said it like an admission. I saw you that day, 15 years old, walking in the rain, looking like the world had already beaten you down. And something in me recognized something in you, like I'd been waiting for you without knowing it. That's insane. Probably, but it's true. I went home that night and I couldn't stop thinking about you, about the way you held yourself like you were trying to take up less space, about the bruise on your wrist that you kept trying to hide, about how no one else seemed to see you at all. Elena's hand went automatically to her wrist, even though that bruise was 3 years old. Her aunt had grabbed her too hard during an argument about money. Elena had worn long sleeves for 2 weeks. So I started paying attention, Victor continued. I learned your name, your school, your situation, and the more I learned, the angrier I got. Angry at what? At everyone who should have been protecting you and wasn't. Your aunt who spent money on cigarettes while you went hungry. The school counselors who saw your grades dropping and did nothing. The system that let an 18-year-old inherit debt that wasn't hers. His voice had gone cold. You were drowning and everyone just walked past. So you decided to play savior? I decided to pay attention. There's a difference. Elena pushed her plate away, appetite gone. You're describing stalking. You know that, right? This whole thing, watching me, paying my bills without asking, controlling my life from a distance, that's stalking. Yes. The simple admission caught her off guard. You're not even going to defend it? Why would I? You're right. It is stalking. It's obsessive and controlling and probably a dozen other things a therapist would have a field day with. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. But it kept you alive. It kept you safe. And if I had to do it over again, I'd make the same choice. You don't get to make choices for me. I already have, for 3 years. And your life is better because of it. Elena stood so fast her chair scraped against the floor. You're unbelievable. You think just because you paid some bills that gives you the right to, what? Own me? Decide my future? I think it proves I'm serious. Victor stood as well, and suddenly the space between them felt charged. I didn't do this on a whim, Elena. I've spent 3 years making sure you had what you needed, waiting until you were old enough, planning for this moment. You think I'm going to walk away now? Yes, because that's what sane people do when someone says no. Have you said no? The question stopped her cold. What? You've said this is crazy. You've said I'm obsessive. You've said a lot of things, but you haven't actually said no. He moved closer, and Elena's back hit the counter. Why is that? Because I'm processing. Because this is insane, and I need time to... You're stalling. Because part of you wants to say yes, and that terrifies you more than I do. Elena's heart was hammering. You're wrong. Then say no. Right now. Say you don't want this, and I'll have my driver take you anywhere you want to go. I'll make sure you're set up somewhere safe. Somewhere you can start over. But you'll never see me again. Is that what you want? She should say yes. Should take the escape he was offering and run as far as possible. But her throat had closed up, and the word wouldn't come. Victor's expression shifted into something almost gentle. You can't say it, can you? I hate you. No, you don't. You hate that I'm right. He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away. When she didn't, his hand curved against her cheek. You hate that someone finally sees you and it comes with conditions. You hate that you're relieved. You hate that you've been so invisible for so long that being claimed by someone feels like coming home. Elena's eyes burned. Stop. Why? Because it's true? Because you're not being fair. I'm being honest. There's a difference. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I'm not offering you a fairy tale, Elena. I'm offering you reality, my reality. And yes, it comes with conditions. I'm possessive. I'm controlling. I want to know where you are and who you're with because the thought of you in danger makes me violent, but I'll also protect you with everything I have. I'll make sure you never want for anything. I'll see you when the rest of the world looks right through you. That's not love. That's obsession. Maybe. But obsession kept you alive when love would have looked away. The words hit like a physical blow. Elena pulled away from his touch, wrapping her arms around herself. I need to think. I need space. How much space? I don't know. More than a morning. This is my life you're asking me to. I'm not asking. His voice was quiet but absolute. I'm offering. There's a difference. But I understand you need time, so I'll give you 3 days. 3 days to decide my entire future? That's insane. 3 days is generous. I've waited 3 years. I could have taken you home from that bakery last night and married you by morning. I have the resources, I have the connections, but I want you to choose this. I want you to understand what you're saying yes to. Elena's laugh came out bitter. What I'm saying yes to? You just said you're not asking. I'm not asking you to marry me. That's happening regardless. I'm asking you to accept it willingly instead of fighting me every step of the way. You can't just... People don't just decide someone's going to marry them. I do. I have, and you will. He said it with such certainty that Elena wanted to throw something. The question isn't whether you'll be my wife. The question is whether you'll hate me for it or whether you'll let yourself want it too. This is kidnapping. This is protection. From what? Victor's expression went dark. Come with me. I want to show you something. He didn't wait for an answer, just walked toward his office. After a moment of furious indecision, Elena followed. She told herself it was because she needed to understand what she was dealing with, not because some part of her wanted to hear what he had to say. The office was all dark wood and leather, with windows overlooking the city and a desk that looked like it cost more than a car. Victor opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. He handed it to her without ceremony. What is this? The people who wanted to collect on your aunt's debt. Elena's hand shook as she opened the folder. Inside were photos, men with hard faces and cold eyes, documents outlining debts and payment schedules and terms that made her stomach turn, and at the bottom, a single page with her name on it. Elena Ward, age 18, no family, no resources. Estimated value for labor, 6 months to cover $47,000 in outstanding debt. After that, subject can be moved to secondary operations for continued revenue generation. The words swam in front of her eyes. Secondary operations? You don't want to know. But she did. She could guess. And the guess made her feel sick. This isn't real. You made this up to scare me. I bought your debt from these people 6 months ago for twice what your aunt owed. They were disappointed, but not stupid enough to refuse. Do you want to know what they would have done if I hadn't? Elena couldn't breathe. The folder fell from her hands, paper scattering across the expensive rug. They were going to grab you on your way home from work, Victor continued, his voice flat and factual. There's an alley you cut through near the bakery. No cameras, no foot traffic after dark. They'd already scouted it, had a timeline, had a plan, and you would have disappeared and no one would have looked for you because no one knew to care. Stop. You asked what I'm protecting you from. That's what. Those men, that future, that world that would have chewed you up and spit you out and never thought twice. He crouched down to her level. When had she sat on the floor? And his eyes were intense. I stopped it. I've been stopping it. For 3 years, I've made sure no one could touch you, and I'll keep doing it for the rest of your life, because the alternative is unacceptable. Elena was shaking. Why not just pay the debt and leave me alone? Why this? Why marriage? Because paying your debt wasn't enough. There's always another threat, always another danger. The only way to truly protect you is to make you untouchable, and you become untouchable when you're mine, when everyone knows that hurting you means answering to me. So I'm what? A possession? You're my wife. There's a difference. I haven't agreed to anything, but you will. He said it with maddening confidence. Because now you know what's out there. Now you know what I've been protecting you from. And you're smart enough to understand that my obsession, my control, my absolute refusal to let you go, it's the only thing standing between you and a nightmare. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she could protect herself, that she didn't need him. But the photos were still scattered on the floor, and the words secondary operations were burned into her brain, and she knew that he was right. She was trapped. Had been trapped from the moment her aunt died and left her with debts to men who saw her as inventory. The only question was which cage she chose, Victor's golden apartment or a nightmare she couldn't escape. I hate you, she whispered. I know. His hand came up to cup her face again, and his touch was surprisingly gentle. But you'll marry me anyway, and one day you'll understand that this was the only way. The only way for what? To keep you alive, to keep you safe, to make you mine in a way that no one can challenge. He leaned closer, and Elena could smell his cologne, could see the absolute certainty in his eyes. 3 days, Elena, think about it. But know that on the 4th day, we're getting married, whether you're ready or not. You can't force me to sign papers. I can do a lot of things you think I can't, but I'd rather not. He stood, offering her his hand. Let me show you something else. Elena didn't take his hand, stood on her own, using the wall for support. What? The apartment I had prepared for you. What apartment? The one you'll live in after we're married. I want you to see it. I want you to understand what life with me looks like. I'm standing in your home. I can see this isn't where you'll live. Not yet. Not until you're ready. He was already walking toward the door. Come on. Against her better judgment, Elena followed. They took the elevator up 2 more floors, and when the doors opened, Elena stepped into a space that took her breath away. It was similar to Victor's apartment. Same windows, same views, but different, softer. The colors were warmer, the furniture less austere. There was a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a kitchen with copper pots hanging from a rack, a bedroom with a 4-poster bed, and curtains that billowed in the breeze from an open balcony door. This is yours, Victor said from behind her. I had it designed for you, based on things I noticed you liked. The books are from that shop you used to walk past on your way home from school. I bought every title you ever stopped to look at. The kitchen is set up for someone who likes to cook, which you used to before money got too tight. The bedroom faces east because you're an early riser. Elena walked through the space like she was in a dream. Everything was perfect. Everything was designed for her, for a version of her that might have existed if her life had been different, if she'd had money, stability, the luxury of preferences. This is manipulation, she said, but her voice wavered. This is a promise. This is what I'm offering you. A life where you get to have things, want things, be more than just surviving. She turned to face him. In exchange for what? What do you get out of this? You. In my life, in my home, in my bed, wearing my ring and carrying my name and knowing that you're protected by everything I am and everything I have. That's not an equal exchange. Maybe not, but it's the one I'm offering. He moved closer, and Elena's back hit the bookshelf. 3 days, Elena. Live here if you want. I'll have Margaret bring you anything you need. Explore the city. Think. But on the 4th day, I'm coming for your answer, and if you say no, what? You'll force me anyway? No. I'll let you go. I'll set you up somewhere safe, give you enough money to start over, and I'll never contact you again. His eyes were dark, unreadable. But you won't have my protection, and the world is dangerous for girls like you. Girls who've been invisible for so long that no one notices when they disappear. It was a threat wrapped in concern, and Elena hated how effective it was. That's not fair. No, it's not, but it's honest. He reached past her and pulled a book from the shelf. Pride and Prejudice, she noticed. One she'd looked at a dozen times in that shop window, but never been able to afford. You like stories about women who have to choose between security and freedom, who make bargains with powerful men because the alternative is worse. This is your moment. This is your choice. It's not a choice if the alternative is death. The alternative is risk. There's a difference. He pressed the book into her hands. But yes, staying with me is the safer option, and that's by design. I want you safe. I want you here. I want you to choose me because you're smart enough to understand what I'm offering. Elena clutched the book like a lifeline. And if I grow to hate you, then you'll hate me in comfort and safety. I can live with that. That's sick. That's honest. I'm not interested in lying to you, Elena. I'm interested in keeping you alive and making you mine. Everything else is negotiable. He left her there in the apartment that was supposed to be hers, surrounded by things he thought she'd like, facing a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Elena sank onto the couch, soft leather, expensive, and opened the book he'd given her. There was an inscription on the inside cover in that same sharp handwriting. For Elena, may you find the strength to choose your own cage. V. She threw the book across the room and immediately regretted it because it was a beautiful edition and she'd wanted it for years. Then she put her face in her hands and tried to figure out how her life had become a negotiation with a man who'd been watching her since she was 15. The worst part was that he wasn't wrong about any of it. She was in danger. She had been in danger. And his obsessive, controlling, utterly insane protection was the only reason she was still here to be angry about it. 3 days. He'd given her 3 days to reconcile herself to a future she'd never imagined and couldn't escape. Elena stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city spread below her. Somewhere down there was her old apartment, her old life, the version of herself who'd been invisible and afraid and so tired she could barely stand. That girl was gone. She'd shattered along with that coffee cup. The question was what came next, who she'd become. Whether she'd fight Victor every step of the way, or whether she'd accept what he was offering and learn to want it. She had 3 days to decide. 3 days to figure out if she could live with being seen, being wanted, being claimed by a man who looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. 3 days to choose between freedom that might kill her and a cage made of gold and obsession and a kind of twisted devotion that almost looked like love. Elena pressed her forehead against the cool glass and tried not to think about how part of her had already made the choice. How part of her had chosen the moment she'd gotten into that car. How part of her had been waiting for someone to see her for so long that now that someone had, she didn't know how to let go. Even if that someone was dangerous. Even if that someone was wrong. Even if that someone was Victor DeLuca, and choosing him meant stepping into a life where she'd never be invisible again. But she'd never be free either. 3 days felt like forever, and not enough time at all. Elena spent the first day alone in the apartment that was supposed to be hers, pacing the hardwood floors like a caged animal, and trying to convince herself she still had choices. By nightfall, she'd made it through exactly 3 pages of Pride and Prejudice before throwing it down again, unable to focus on Elizabeth Bennet's problems when her own felt so much more immediate and impossible. Margaret brought dinner, some kind of chicken in wine sauce that probably had a French name Elena didn't know, and set it on the dining table without commenting on the book spine up on the floor or the fact that Elena was still wearing yesterday's clothes because she refused to accept more of Victor's carefully selected wardrobe. The older woman just gave her a knowing look and left without a word. Elena ate because not eating felt like letting Victor win some invisible battle, then immediately felt stupid for making food political. Everything in this apartment was his. The air she breathed was climate controlled by his money. The water in the shower ran hot because he paid the bills. There was no part of this space that wasn't touched by his influence, and fighting it was like fighting gravity. She fell asleep on the couch, reading the same 3 pages over and over, and woke to find someone had covered her with a blanket. Margaret, probably. Or maybe Victor had let himself in while she slept, stood over her in the dark, watched her the way he'd been watching for 3 years. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made her angry that she couldn't decide if it did. The second day, she tried to leave. Not to run, she wasn't stupid enough to think that would work, but just to walk, to prove she could, to remember what it felt like to move through the world on her own terms. The elevator required a key card to access the lobby. Elena didn't have one. She stood there for 10 minutes, pressing the button over and over, like maybe the 11th time would be magic, before accepting that Victor had thought of this too. Of course he had. He'd spent 3 years thinking of everything. When she went back to the apartment, there was a note on the kitchen counter in that familiar handwriting. If you want to go out, call downstairs. Marcus will accompany you anywhere you'd like, for your safety. Elena crumpled the note and threw it in the trash, then immediately fished it back out and smoothed it flat on the counter. Evidence. Of what, she wasn't sure. That he was controlling? She already knew that. That he'd thought of everything? That too. That he signed his notes like they were love letters when they were really just polite imprisonment? She didn't call downstairs. Didn't go out. Spent the day reading the spines of the books he'd bought for her. He'd been right about most of them, which made her angrier, and trying to figure out what kind of person noticed what a 15-year-old girl looked at in bookstore windows and remembered 3 years later. A stalker, obviously, but also someone who paid attention in a way no one else ever had. That night, she dreamed about the men in the folder, about hard hands and secondary operations and disappearing into an alley no one would look twice at. She woke up gasping, sheets tangled around her legs, and found herself reaching for a phone to call Victor before she'd fully processed the instinct. She didn't make the call, but she thought about it for an hour, staring at his contact information. He'd programmed himself into her phone, of course he had, before finally falling back into uneasy sleep. The third day started with a knock on the door at 8 in the morning. Elena opened it to find Victor standing there with coffee and a paper bag that smelled like fresh pastries. He was wearing dark slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking unfairly put together for someone who'd probably been awake as long as she had. "Good morning," he said, like this was normal, like he hadn't locked her in a luxury apartment and given her 3 days to accept that her life was his now. "What are you doing here?" "Bringing you breakfast." "May I come in?" "It's your apartment." "It's yours. I'm asking permission." Elena stepped back because blocking the doorway felt childish, and Victor walked past her into the kitchen like he belonged there. Which he did. Which was the whole problem. He set the coffee and pastries on the counter, then turned to face her. "You look terrible." "Thanks. That's exactly what every girl wants to hear." "I mean, you look like you haven't slept. Bad dreams?" Elena's throat tightened. Of course he'd know. Of course he'd guess. "None of your business. Everything about you is my business. That's the point." He opened the pastry bag and pulled out something that looked like it had come from a bakery far nicer than Martelli's. "Eat, then we're going out." "I don't want to go anywhere with you. I don't recall asking what you wanted. I said we're going out." He slid the pastry across to her. "You've been locked in this apartment for 2 days. You need air, sunlight, a reminder that the world still exists." "I tried to leave yesterday. Your elevator won't let me." "I know. Marcus told me that. That's why I'm here to take you out properly. Not with a security detail. Just you and me." Elena crossed her arms. "And if I say no? Then I'll sit here and drink coffee until you change your mind. I have nothing scheduled until this evening. I can be very patient when necessary." He'd already proven that. 3 years of patience, watching and waiting and planning for this exact moment. What was a few more hours? Elena picked up the pastry and took a bite. It was perfect, flaky and buttery and filled with some kind of cream that tasted expensive. She hated that she enjoyed it. "Where would we go?" she asked. "Wherever you want. The city is yours, Elena. I'm just the driver." "That's a lie. Nothing about this is mine. Everything is yours and you're letting me borrow it." Victor's expression shifted into something almost sad. "Is that what you think?" "That's what I know." He was quiet for a moment, studying her in that intense way that made her feel like he could see straight through skin and bone to whatever she was trying to hide. Then he set down his coffee and moved closer, stopping just outside her personal space. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. Can you do that?" Elena nodded because speaking felt dangerous. "I don't want you to borrow anything from me. I want to give you everything. There's a difference." His voice was low, serious. "When I say this apartment is yours, I mean it becomes legally yours the moment you sign the papers. The books, the furniture, all of it, yours. When I say I'll protect you, I mean with everything I have, including my life if necessary. When I say you're mine, I don't mean I own you. I mean you belong with me in a way that's bigger than ownership. Do you understand?" "No, that doesn't make sense." "It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to be true." He reached out slowly and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I know you're scared. I know this is overwhelming. I know you think I'm crazy and controlling and probably a dozen other things that are all accurate. But I need you to understand that my obsession with you isn't about power. It's about the fact that I looked at you 3 years ago and knew, the way people know gravity exists, that you were supposed to be mine and I was supposed to protect you. Everything I've done since then has been building toward that." Elena's eyes burned. "That's not how the real world works." "It's how my world works, and you're in it now, whether you signed up for it or not." His hand dropped back to his side. "So, are you coming out with me, or are we spending the day in this kitchen arguing in circles?" She should say no, should refuse on principle, should make him understand that she wasn't going to just fall in line because he'd decided her fate 3 years ago. But she'd been in this apartment for 2 days and the walls were starting to feel smaller, and the truth was she wanted to see the sun. Wanted to remember what it felt like to move through the world like a person instead of a problem being managed. "Fine, but I'm not holding your hand or pretending this is a date." "Noted." Victor's mouth twitched like he was fighting a smile. "Go get dressed. Something comfortable. We're walking." Elena wanted to argue about the instructions, but she was still in sweatpants and the oversized shirt she'd slept in, so she retreated to the bedroom and found jeans and a sweater that fit perfectly, because of course they did. When she came back out, Victor was waiting by the door with a jacket that looked suspiciously like it would fit her. "I had Margaret pick this up," he said before she could ask. "It's October. You'll need it." Elena took the jacket because being cold to prove a point was stupid. It was soft leather, worn enough to not look new, and it fit like it had been made for her. She tried not to think about how much effort went into making everything in her life feel natural when it was all carefully orchestrated. They took the elevator down in silence. Marcus was waiting in the lobby. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that suggested he'd be very good at violence if necessary. He nodded at Victor, didn't look twice at Elena, and held the door open as they walked out into the October morning. The city was bright and cold, the kind of perfect fall day that made everything look sharper. Elena breathed in air that didn't smell like climate control and felt something in her chest ease slightly. "Where are we going?" she asked. "I thought the park. There's a market on Saturdays, unless you'd rather go somewhere else." Elena glanced at him. Victor was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The park is fine." They walked in silence for a few blocks. Marcus followed at a discreet distance, close enough to intervene if necessary, far enough that it almost felt like they were alone. Almost. The market was already crowded when they arrived, vendors selling everything from fresh produce to handmade jewelry to hot cider that steamed in the cold air. Elena stopped at a stall selling scarves and ran her fingers over fabric she'd never be able to afford, then moved on before the vendor could start a sales pitch. "You like that one," Victor said. Not a question. "I like a lot of things. Doesn't mean I need them." Need and want are different. He was already pulling out his wallet. "Don't." "Why not?" "Because I don't want you buying me things. I don't want to owe you more than I already do." But Victor put his wallet away but didn't look happy about it. "You don't owe me anything. That's not true, and you know it. Everything I have right now is because of you. The clothes, the apartment, the food, all of it. I'm drowning in debt to you, and you won't even let me acknowledge it. Because it's not debt, it's..." He stopped, jaw tight. "Let's keep walking." They moved through the market in tense silence. Elena looked at things she couldn't have and tried not to think about how Victor would buy all of it for her if she just asked. How easy it would be to let him. How dangerous that ease felt. They were passing a flower stall when someone called out, "Elena! Elena Ward!" Elena turned to find a girl about her age staring at her with wide eyes. It took her a moment to place the face. Sarah something, from her high school. They'd been in the same English class junior year. "Sarah, hi." Elena forced a smile. "Oh my God, I haven't seen you in forever. How are you? What are you doing now?" Sarah's gaze slid to Victor, and her eyes went even wider. "And who's this?" Elena felt Victor's hand settle on the small of her back, possessive, claiming. She wanted to step away but couldn't without making it obvious. "This is Victor. What were they? What could she possibly say? "I'm her fiancé," Victor said smoothly. "Victor DeLuca." Sarah's mouth fell open. "Fiancé? Elena, that's amazing. When did this happen? Why didn't you say anything?" "It's recent," Elena managed. "Very recent." "Well, congratulations. You look great, by the way. Different. Good different." Sarah was already backing away, clearly uncomfortable with Victor's intense stare. "I should go. It was great seeing you. We should get coffee sometime." She disappeared into the crowd before Elena could respond. The moment she was gone, Elena turned on Victor. "Fiancé, really? Would you prefer I said future wife? That's more accurate. I prefer you not lie to people I know." "It's not a lie. You're going to marry me. We're just skipping the formality of a proposal." He guided her away from the flower stall with that hand still on her back. "Besides, did you see her face? She believes it. No one's going to question why Elena Ward is suddenly engaged to someone like me." "Someone like you?" "Rich, powerful, completely wrong for you on paper." His voice was dry. "She'll tell everyone she knows by tonight. By tomorrow, it'll be all over social media. By next week, no one will remember you were ever that invisible girl from the bakery." Elena stopped walking. "I don't want to be visible because of you." "Too late. You already are. Victor turned to face her, and his expression was serious. Do you know what Marcus is doing right now besides following us? I don't care. He's watching for anyone who might recognize you from your old life. Anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions or make you feel like you need to explain yourself. Anyone who might make you doubt what we're building here. We're not building anything. You're building it and dragging me along. Same result. He reached up and touched her face, and Elena hated that she didn't pull away. I told you I'd protect you from everything. That includes people who knew you when you were small and might want to keep you that way. Sarah wasn't. She was just being nice. Sarah was shocked to see you looking healthy and happy and attached to someone with money. She'll go home and tell her friends, and they'll all wonder how you managed to land someone like me. Some will be happy for you. Most will be jealous. A few will try to dig into our relationship to find the crack. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. I'm not letting anyone near those cracks. You're mine to protect. That means protecting you from everything, including people who think they're being kind. Elena pulled away from his touch. You're paranoid. I'm thorough. There's a difference. They started walking again, but the ease of earlier was gone. Elena felt exposed now, like everyone in the market was staring at her, judging her, wondering how a girl like her ended up with a man like Victor. The answer was simple. She didn't end up with him. He'd decided 3 years ago, and she was just now finding out. They stopped at a coffee cart, and Victor ordered for both of them without asking what she wanted. The fact that he got it right, black coffee with 1 sugar, made her want to throw the cup at him. Tomorrow is day 4, she said instead. I'm aware. What happens if I say no? Victor took a sip of his espresso. I told you, I let you go. You're lying. I'm not. If you genuinely want to leave, if you can look me in the eye tomorrow and tell me you'd rather take your chances out there, he gestured at the city around them, then accept what I'm offering. I'll let you go. I'll set you up somewhere safe, give you enough money to start over, and I'll stay away. Why don't I believe you? Because you're smart enough to know that letting you go would kill me. But I'd do it anyway if that's what you needed. His eyes were dark, serious. I want you willing, Elena. I want you to choose this. But if you can't, if the cost is too high, I won't force you to stay. You already have. The moment you closed the bakery, the moment you brought me to your apartment, the moment you made me see those files, you forced this. You just want me to accept it prettily. Yes. He didn't even try to deny it. Because the alternative is watching you destroy yourself trying to fight something you can't change. I'd rather have you angry and alive than proud and in danger. Elena stared at him, at this man who spoke about her life like it was a problem he'd already solved, and felt something crack open in her chest. I hate that you're right. I hate that you've backed me into a corner where saying yes is the only smart choice. I hate that you've been manipulating my life for 3 years, and now I'm supposed to be grateful. I don't need you to be grateful. I need you to be safe. Same thing to you, apparently. Maybe. Victor reached out and took her hand before she could stop him. But I need you to understand something. This isn't just about keeping you alive. It's about giving you a life worth living. You've been surviving for so long you don't remember what it's like to actually exist. I want to show you that. I want to give you that. In exchange for what? Your presence? Your time. Eventually, your trust. His hand tightened on hers. I'm not asking for love, Elena. I know that's too much. But I am asking for a chance. 3 months. Give me 3 months as my wife. And if at the end you still hate me, if you still want to leave, I'll let you go. No strings, no conditions. Why 3 months? Because that's how long I think it'll take for you to see that this isn't a cage. It's a beginning. Elena wanted to pull her hand away, but couldn't make herself do it. His grip was warm, steady, and some traitorous part of her liked the feeling of being held. And if after 3 months I still want to leave, then I'll be devastated. But I'll honor the agreement. He pulled her closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Do we have a deal? This is insane. That's not an answer. Elena looked around the market, at the people shopping, at the vendors selling things, at Marcus watching them from 30 feet away with a hand near his jacket where she suspected he kept a gun. She looked at the life she'd left behind and the life Victor was offering and tried to figure out which scared her more. The answer was neither. What scared her was that she was starting to want what he was offering, that the cage was starting to look like safety, that being claimed by someone who'd watched her for 3 years felt less like violation and more like validation. One condition, she said finally, name it. During those 3 months, you tell me the truth about everything. Why you really watched me, what you want from this. What happens if I leave? No more games, no more manipulation, just honesty. Victor studied her for a long moment. Agreed. But the honesty goes both ways. You tell me when you're scared, when you're angry, when you start to want this and it terrifies you. Deal? Elena's heart was hammering. This was it. The moment where she chose the cage or took her chances with whatever waited outside. The moment where she stopped being invisible and became his. Deal, she whispered. Victor's smile was slow and devastating. Good, because we're getting married tomorrow. Tomorrow? Are you insane? We agreed on 4 days. Tomorrow is day 4. I've waited 3 years, Elena. I'm not waiting any longer. But I need to... There's paperwork. There's... All handled. Margaret has your dress. Marcus has secured the venue. The officiant is already paid. All you have to do is show up and say yes. Elena's head was spinning. You planned this. Before I even agreed, you planned the whole thing. Of course I did. I told you. I've been planning this for 3 years. Did you really think I'd leave anything to chance? What if I'd said no? You didn't. You won't. Wait. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, and the gesture felt both old-fashioned and possessive. You're mine, Elena. You have been since the moment I saw you. Tomorrow just makes it official. She should be angry, should fight, should tell him this was moving too fast and she needed more time. But looking at him, at the certainty in his eyes, at the careful control starting to crack around the edges, she realized something. He was just as trapped as she was. Whatever this was between them, it had its hooks in him too. He'd spent 3 years watching, waiting, planning for a girl he barely knew because something in her had called to something in him. This wasn't just obsession, it was compulsion. He couldn't let her go any more than she could walk away. They were both in the cage. The only difference was he'd built it, and she was still learning the dimensions. Tomorrow, she repeated. We're getting married tomorrow. Yes, and then what? Then you come home with me, and we start figuring out what this is. You already know what this is. You've decided. I know what I want it to be, but what it becomes depends on both of us. He pulled her close, right there in the middle of the market with people watching and Marcus pretending not to pay attention. I'm going to be honest with you now, like we agreed. Do you want to hear it? Elena nodded because speaking was impossible. I'm terrified, Victor said quietly. I've spent 3 years building this moment in my head, and now that it's here, I'm terrified you'll say yes and hate me, or say yes and regret it, or say yes and spend the rest of your life looking for the exit. His hand came up to cup her face. But I'm more terrified of the alternative, of letting you go and spending the rest of my life wondering what if, of watching from a distance while you struggle or suffer or disappear. I can't do it. I won't. Even if keeping you means you hate me, it's better than losing you. That's not love. That's possession. Maybe, but it's all I have. His eyes were intense, desperate in a way she'd never seen before. I'm not good at this, Elena. I'm not good at soft or gentle or giving people space. I'm good at control, at protection, at making sure the things I care about stay safe, even if they hate me for it. That's what I'm offering. It's not perfect. It's probably not even healthy. But it's real. Elena's throat was tight. What if I can't give you what you want? Then we figure it out together. But you have to stay. That's the only non-negotiable. You have to stay and let me try. She thought about the apartment with its carefully chosen books, about the clothes that fit perfectly, about 3 years of protection she'd never known she had, about a man who looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. She thought about secondary operations and debt collectors and disappearing into an alley, about being invisible and exhausted and so alone that even bad attention would have felt like salvation. She thought about Marcus standing 30 feet away with a gun, about Margaret's knowing looks, about a wedding dress she hadn't chosen waiting for her to wear it. She thought about cages and safety and the difference between being owned and being chosen. Okay, she said. Victor went still. Okay, I'll marry you tomorrow. I'll give you 3 months, and if at the end I want to leave, you'll let me go. That's the deal. His hands tightened on her face like he was afraid she'd disappear. That's the deal. Then okay. Elena took a shaky breath. But I'm telling you now, I'm going to fight you. I'm going to question everything. I'm going to make this as difficult as possible because I don't know how else to be. I know. And you still want this? More than I've wanted anything. He leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers, and Elena felt the tension in his body like a live wire. Thank you. For what? For saying yes, for staying, for giving me a chance to prove that this can be more than a cage. Elena closed her eyes and tried to memorize this moment, the feel of his hands on her face, the sound of the market around them, the exact second where her life split in two before and after. Don't make me regret it, she whispered. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you don't. They stood there in the middle of the market, holding each other like drowning people, while the world moved around them, and Marcus watched, and tomorrow waited with its dress and its vows and its promises of a life Elena hadn't chosen but couldn't refuse. When they finally pulled apart, Victor's eyes were bright with something that might have been hope or might have been victory. Elena couldn't tell the difference anymore. Come on, he said, taking her hand. Let's go home. And because she'd already said yes, because the deal was made and the cage was waiting, Elena let him lead her back through the market, past the vendors and the crowds and the life she used to have. Tomorrow, she'd be Elena DeLuca. Tomorrow, she'd wear his ring and carry his name and step fully into a world where being invisible was no longer an option. Tomorrow, she'd find out if choosing the cage was the smartest thing she'd ever done or the biggest mistake of her life. But tonight she was still Elena Ward, still the girl who'd been invisible and broken and alone. Still the girl who'd shattered a cup and changed everything. She held on to Victor's hand and tried not to think about how good it felt to be held, how dangerous that comfort was, how easy it would be to forget that this was a bargain and not a choice, how much she wanted to forget anyway. The dress was waiting in her apartment when they got back, hanging in the bedroom like a ghost of the future. Elena stood in the doorway staring at it, while Victor watched from behind her with an expression she couldn't read. Margaret has good taste, he said finally. You picked it. I gave suggestions. She made the final choice. He moved past her into the room, running a hand over the fabric. Do you hate it? Elena looked at the dress. Simple ivory silk, elegant without being fussy. The kind of thing she'd have picked for herself if she'd ever had a reason to imagine getting married. Which she hadn't. Marriage had always been something that happened to other people. People with stable lives and normal families and futures that didn't involve debt collectors. It's beautiful, she admitted. But I keep thinking about how you planned this, how you knew I'd say yes before I did, how you had this dress ready like my choice didn't matter. Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I had 3 dresses ready. 3 different styles, 3 different sizes. I didn't know which you'd prefer. I didn't know if you'd want simple or elaborate, modern or traditional. So I prepared for all of it and let Margaret choose what she thought you'd like best based on the things she'd noticed about you this week. Elena turned to look at him. That's still controlling. Yes, but it's controlling that takes your preferences into account. That's the best I can do. The honesty of it disarmed her. She wanted him to be a villain. It would make this easier. But he kept being exactly what he'd promised, obsessive and controlling and utterly honest about both. I need to be alone tonight, she said. Before tomorrow. I need time to think. All right. You're not going to fight me on that? You asked for space. I'm giving it to you. That's part of the deal. Honesty and respect for what you need, even when it's hard for me. He moved toward the door, then stopped. But Elena, I need you to understand something. What? Tomorrow changes everything. After tomorrow, you're my wife, my responsibility, my priority above everything else in my life. And that means I won't be able to give you space the way I can tonight. I'll need to know where you are, who you're with, that you're safe. It's not about controlling you. It's about the fact that keeping you alive is more important to me than my next breath. That's not healthy. I never said it was. I said it's real. He held her gaze. I'm giving you tonight because you asked, but tomorrow, you're mine. and I need you to be ready for what that means." Elena's mouth was dry. "What if I'm not?" "Then we figure it out together. But you still show up tomorrow. You still say yes. We agreed." "I know." "Good." Victor crossed back to her and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Gentle, possessive, final. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He left before she could respond, and Elena sank onto the bed next to the dress that represented a future she'd agreed to but didn't fully understand. She didn't sleep that night. Spent hours staring at the ceiling, at the dress hanging like a question mark, at her phone where she could theoretically call someone except she didn't have anyone to call. Her aunt was dead. Her few acquaintances from school had drifted away when her life got too messy to explain. She was alone in a way that made Victor's obsession feel less like imprisonment and more like the only connection she had left. Maybe that was the saddest part. Not that he'd trapped her, but that being trapped by him was still better than the alternative. Around 3 in the morning, her phone buzzed. A text from Victor. "Can't sleep either. Thinking about tomorrow. About you. About how this is either the best thing I've ever done or the moment I ruin both our lives. But I'd still choose this. I'd still choose you. Sleep well, Elena. Or try to. V." Elena stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "What if I ruin your life instead?" His response came immediately, like he'd been waiting. "Impossible. You're the only thing keeping it from being empty." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Just held the phone against her chest and tried to figure out when exactly she'd stopped being terrified of him and started being terrified for him. Morning came too fast and too slow. Margaret arrived at 8 with coffee and a calm efficiency that suggested she'd done this before, helped prepare brides who were marrying men like Victor for reasons that had nothing to do with love. "How are you feeling?" Margaret asked, setting the coffee on the nightstand. "Like I'm about to make a terrible mistake." "Most brides feel that way, even the ones marrying for love." Elena sat up, accepting the coffee, because it was something to do with her hands. "Did he tell you? About how we met? About the 3 years?" "Mr. DeLuca tells me very little, but I've worked for him long enough to understand how he thinks, how he protects the things he cares about." Margaret's expression was kind, but not pitying. "He's a good man, Miss Ward. He's also a dangerous one. But those two things aren't mutually exclusive. He stalked me for 3 years. He protected you for 3 years. From his perspective, there's a difference." "That's not better." "No, but it's honest." Margaret moved to the closet and began pulling out shoes, accessories, things Elena hadn't noticed the night before. "You said yes. That means some part of you sees value in what he's offering. Trust that part, at least for today." Elena wanted to argue, but Margaret was already bustling around, preparing things with the kind of efficiency that made protest seem pointless. And maybe she was right. Maybe Elena had said yes for a reason beyond fear and self-preservation. Maybe some part of her wanted this, wanted to be seen, wanted to be claimed, wanted to belong to someone who'd moved heaven and earth to keep her safe. Or maybe she was just good at lying to herself. The dress fit perfectly. Of course it did. Elena stood in front of the mirror while Margaret adjusted the hem and tried to recognize herself. The girl looking back was clean, healthy, dressed in silk that probably cost more than 6 months of her old salary. She looked like someone who belonged in Victor's world, someone who could be Elena DeLuca. She looked like a stranger. "You're beautiful," Margaret said softly. "I look scared." "Most brides do, even the ones who are certain." Margaret finished with the hem and stood back. "Mister, DeLuca has a car waiting downstairs. Are you ready?" No, not even close. But Elena nodded anyway because ready or not, this was happening. The venue was a small chapel in a neighborhood Elena had never been to, the kind of place that looked expensive even from the outside. Marcus was waiting by the car, dressed in a suit that made him look almost respectable, and he opened the door without meeting her eyes. The drive was silent. Elena watched the city pass by and thought about running, about telling the driver to stop, about climbing out at a red light and disappearing into the crowds. But Marcus was watching her in the rearview mirror with an expression that said he'd anticipated that exact thought. And besides, where would she go? Back to her moldy apartment? Back to being invisible? Victor had been right about one thing. There was no going back. only forward into whatever this was. The chapel was empty except for a handful of people. Margaret, two men Elena didn't recognize who had the same contained violence as Marcus, and an officiant who looked like he performed shotgun weddings for wealthy men on a regular basis. And Victor, standing at the altar in a black suit that made him look even more dangerous than usual. Elena's steps faltered when she saw him. He was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, and when their eyes met, something passed between them. Recognition, resignation, something that felt too big for the moment. "You came," he said when she reached him. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I wasn't sure. Right up until you walked through that door, I thought you might run." His hand found hers and his grip was tight. "Thank you for not running." "I still might." "I know, but you're here now. That's enough." The ceremony was short, almost brutal in its efficiency. The officiant spoke about commitment and partnership in a voice that suggested he didn't care whether they meant it. Elena barely heard the words. She was too focused on Victor's hand holding hers, on the ring he was sliding onto her finger, a simple band that somehow felt heavier than it should. When it was her turn to speak, her voice came out steady. "I do." Victor's eyes closed briefly, like she'd just given him something he'd been afraid to ask for. Then it was his turn, and his voice was rough when he said, "I do." The officiant pronounced them married, and Victor kissed her before she could process what that meant. It wasn't gentle, it was claiming, possessive, a statement that she was his now in a way that went beyond paperwork. When he pulled back, Elena was shaking. "Breathe," Victor murmured. "Just breathe. Worst part's over." "The worst part is that I'm married to you?" "The worst part is the uncertainty. Now we both know where we stand." Elena wanted to argue that nothing about this was certain, but Margaret was approaching with congratulations, and the two unfamiliar men were shaking Victor's hand, and suddenly she was being ushered out of the chapel and into the car like they had somewhere urgent to be. "Where are we going?" she asked as Marcus pulled into traffic. "Home. Our home. Not the apartment you've been staying in. Mine. Where you'll live from now on." Victor's hand was still holding hers, and he hadn't let go since the ceremony. "Are you all right?" "I just married a man who's been stalking me for 3 years. I'm fantastic." "Elena, don't. Just give me a minute. Let me process this." Victor went quiet, but his thumb was tracing circles on her palm in a gesture that might have been comforting if it wasn't also possessive. Elena stared out the window and tried to figure out what she'd just done, what she'd just agreed to, what her life looked like now that she was legally bound to a man who looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for years. The penthouse was exactly what she'd expected. Expensive, controlled, with views that made the city look small. Victor led her inside with a hand on her back, and Elena tried not to think about how natural the gesture felt. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "No." "Tired?" "I don't know what I am." Victor studied her for a moment, then said, "Come with me." He led her to a room she hadn't seen before, a library with walls of books and comfortable chairs and windows that let in afternoon light. It reminded her of the apartment he'd prepared for her, but bigger, more established. "This is my favorite room in the house," he said. "I come here when I need to think, when things get overwhelming. I thought you might want some time here, alone." Elena looked at him sharply. "Alone? You're leaving me alone after you just married me? You asked for space last night. You're asking for it now, even if you won't say it out loud. So I'm giving it to you." He moved toward the door. "I'll be in my office if you need me. But Elena..." "What?" "You're my wife now. That means this is your home. You don't need permission to go anywhere or do anything here. This isn't a cage. It's..." "What? What is it if not a cage?" Victor was quiet for a long moment. "It's the safest place I could build for you. Whether that feels like freedom or imprisonment is up to you." He left before she could respond, and Elena sank into one of the chairs and tried to breathe, tried to process, tried to figure out how she'd gone from serving coffee in a rundown bakery to being married to one of the most dangerous men she'd ever met. The books on the shelves were organized by subject: history, philosophy, fiction separated by genre. Elena pulled one down at random and found a first edition of something she'd never heard of. She put it back carefully and tried another, and another. Every single book was a first edition, or a rare printing, or something that belonged in a collection instead of actually being read. Just like her, valuable because Victor had decided she was, but ultimately just another thing in his carefully curated world. Elena pressed her face into her hands and tried not to cry. She'd agreed to this. She'd said yes. She'd made a deal, and now she had to live with it for 3 months before she could even think about leaving. 3 months of being Elena DeLuca. 3 months of being watched and protected and claimed by a man who'd built his entire life around keeping her safe. 3 months of figuring out if safety was worth the cost. She stayed in the library for hours, pulling books at random and reading passages without retaining anything. When the light started to fade, there was a knock at the door. "Come in." It was Margaret, carrying a tray with food that smelled better than anything Elena had eaten in years. "Mr. DeLuca thought you might be hungry. He sent you instead of coming himself. He thought you needed space. Was he wrong?" Elena looked at the food, some kind of pasta with vegetables, fresh bread, water in an actual glass. Her stomach growled traitorously. "No, he wasn't wrong." Margaret set the tray on a small table. "He also asked me to tell you that he's having dinner in his office. He won't disturb you tonight unless you ask for him." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you're operating under the impression that he's going to force himself on you. That now that you're married, you've lost the right to say no." Margaret's expression was kind but firm. "Mr. DeLuca doesn't work that way. He's obsessive and controlling, yes, but he's also the most honorable man I've ever known. He won't touch you until you want him to." Elena's face heated. That's not... "I'm simply clarifying the terms of your arrangement. You have your own room if you want it, your own space. The marriage is legal, but it doesn't obligate you to anything you're not ready for." Margaret moved toward the door. "Eat. Rest. Tomorrow you can start figuring out what this life looks like." She left, and Elena stared at the food, at this evidence of Victor's attention even when he was giving her space, at the realization that he'd thought about her comfort, her hunger, her need for time alone. She ate because not eating was stupid, and because the food was good, and because some part of her appreciated that he'd sent Margaret instead of coming himself. When she finished, she wandered the penthouse like a ghost, mapping the space that was supposedly hers now. There were 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a restaurant, and that office where Victor had apparently barricaded himself to give her space. Elena stood outside the office door for a long time, listening to the faint sound of him moving around inside. She could knock, could go in, could demand answers or explanations, or just company because being alone in this enormous space was starting to make her feel small. But she didn't. Instead, she found the bedroom Margaret had indicated was hers, across the hall from what was obviously Victor's, and closed the door behind her. The room was beautiful, soft grays and blues, comfortable furniture, windows that overlooked the city. There was a bathroom attached with a tub that could fit 3 people and a shower that had better water pressure than anything Elena had experienced in her life. She showered because it was something to do, because she needed to wash off the feeling of the chapel and the vows and the ring on her finger that kept catching her attention. When she got out, there was a robe hanging on the door that fit perfectly, because of course it did. Elena climbed into bed, softer than anything she'd ever slept on, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she'd have to figure out what being Elena DeLuca meant, what her role was in this marriage of convenience and obsession, what Victor expected from her beyond just existing in his space. But tonight, she was just exhausted, wrung out from a day of impossible choices and binding promises. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about the man across the hall who'd married her today, and then left her alone because she'd needed space. Tried not to think about how that restraint made her trust him a little more than she wanted to. She was almost asleep when she heard it. A door opening across the hall. Footsteps in the corridor. A pause outside her door that lasted just long enough for her to hold her breath. Then Victor's voice, quiet enough that she almost missed it. "Good night, Elena. Thank you for today. For saying yes. For being here." His footsteps retreated and Elena heard his door close. She lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and felt something crack in her chest. He was dangerous. He was obsessive. He'd controlled her life for 3 years without her knowledge. But he'd also just thanked her for marrying him like it was a gift, instead of a foregone conclusion. Like her choice mattered, even though he'd engineered the situation to leave her without real options. Elena pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heart hammer, and tried to figure out when exactly she'd started caring what Victor thought of her. When his restraint had started feeling like consideration instead of strategy. When the cage had started feeling less like a prison and more like the first safe place she'd ever known. She fell asleep with those questions unanswered, with the ring heavy on her finger and her future uncertain. But for the first time in years, she slept without nightmares, without fear that tomorrow would be worse than today. Because tomorrow she'd wake up as Elena DeLuca. And whatever that meant, whatever came next, she wasn't facing it alone anymore. The man who'd claimed her was right across the hall, dangerous and obsessed and absolutely certain that she belonged to him, but also patient enough to give her space, controlled enough to thank her for choosing him, even though the choice had been impossible. Human enough to make her wonder if maybe, just maybe, this could be more than a bargain, if it could be something worth keeping. She didn't have answers yet, but she had 3 months to find them. 3 months to figure out if Victor's obsession could transform into something she could live with. Something she could maybe even want. 3 months to learn whether the cage was really a cage or whether it was something else entirely. Elena pulled the blanket up to her chin and let herself drift. Tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. And when it did, she'd start figuring out what it meant to be married to a man who'd been waiting 3 years for her to become his. For tonight, though, she was just tired. Just grateful for a soft bed and a full stomach and the absence of fear. It wasn't love. It wasn't even trust yet, but it was a beginning, and maybe that was enough. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the disorienting realization that she was married. The ring on her finger caught the light, and for a moment she just stared at it, trying to reconcile the girl who'd served coffee 4 days ago with the woman wearing Victor DeLuca's name. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Elena pulled on the robe and ventured into the hallway, half expecting Victor to be waiting, but the penthouse felt empty in a way that made her chest tight. She found a note in the kitchen, propped against a French press that was still warm. Had to handle some business. Didn't want to wake you. There's breakfast in the warmer. Help yourself to anything. I'll be back by noon. V. Elena crumpled the note, then smoothed it out again. Even his absences were controlled, explained, accounted for. She poured coffee and found the breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast that was still somehow crispy, and ate standing at the window overlooking a city that looked different now that she was seeing it as Elena DeLuca. She spent the morning exploring the penthouse more thoroughly. Found Victor's bedroom, larger than hers, with a bed that looked like it had never been slept in and a closet full of suits organized by color. His bathroom had the same excessive luxury as hers, but there was something almost monastic about the space. Nothing personal. Nothing that suggested he actually lived here instead of just existing between obligations. The office was locked. Elena stood outside it for a full minute, hand on the doorknob, before accepting that some boundaries still existed even in this cage of silk and expensive real estate. Victor returned at 11:53. Elena heard the door open, heard his footsteps, and stayed in the library pretending to read because she didn't know what to say to him in the daylight. Didn't know how to be a wife to a man who'd bought her future. He found her anyway, knocked on the doorframe even though the door was open, and when she looked up, he was watching her with an expression that might have been uncertainty if Victor DeLuca was capable of such a thing. "Good morning," he said. "It's almost noon." "Good, late morning then." He moved into the room but kept his distance. "Did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years. The bed's obscene." "It's comfortable. There's a difference." He gestured to the chair across from her. "May I?" Elena nodded because saying no felt petty. Victor sat, and the silence stretched between them like a living thing. "We should talk about expectations," he said finally, "about what this marriage looks like day to day." "You mean what you expect from me?" "I mean what we both expect from each other. This goes both ways, Elena." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I told you I'd be honest, so here's the truth. I don't know how to be a husband. I know how to protect, how to provide, how to control situations so they don't spiral into chaos. But partnership? That's new territory. You had 3 years to figure it out. I had 3 years to watch you from a distance and build fantasies about what this would be like. Reality is messier." His mouth twisted. "You're messier. In all the best ways, you fight me more than I expected. You question everything. You won't just accept what I give you. And I'm realizing that's what I actually want, even though it's harder than I planned for. Elena set down her book. What did you think would happen? That you'd marry me and I'd just fall in line? Honestly, part of me hoped so. The rest of me knew better. He ran a hand through his hair, and the gesture was so unguarded that Elena felt something shift. I'm trying, Elena. I know it doesn't look like much. I know you're still angry and confused and probably regretting saying yes, but I'm trying to give you space while also making sure you're safe, and those two things don't always align. So what do you want from me? I want you to live here, to let me protect you, to stop looking at me like I'm the enemy. He met her eyes. And eventually, when you're ready, I want you to let me be more than just the man who controls your life. I want to be the man you choose to be with. That's a lot to ask. I know. That's why I'm giving you 3 months, time to adjust, time to see what this could be. He stood, and Elena felt the loss of his attention like a physical thing. But in the meantime, there are practical things we need to address. Like what? Like the fact that you're my wife now, and that comes with certain risks. People will want to know who you are, where you came from, whether you're a weakness they can exploit. His voice had gone cold. I need you to understand what you're walking into, what being Elena DeLuca means. Elena's stomach dropped. What kind of risks? The kind where people who want to hurt me will look at you and see an opportunity. The kind where you can't go anywhere without security. The kind where your old life needs to stay buried so no one can use it against us. My old life is already buried. You made sure of that when you closed the bakery. I made sure you were untraceable. That's different. But now that we're married, people will dig. They'll look for connections, for leverage, for anything that makes you vulnerable. He pulled out his phone and showed her a news article. This went live an hour ago. Elena stared at the headline. Mysterious bride. Victor DeLuca marries in private ceremony. Below it was a photo of them leaving the chapel. She looked scared. He looked possessive. And together they looked like a story people would want to pick apart. How did they even... Someone always talks. Someone always takes a photo. I expected this. Victor pocketed his phone. What matters is how we handle it, and that starts with you understanding the role you're playing. Role? This isn't a performance. Everything is a performance when you're in my world. The question is whether you're performing strength or vulnerability. His eyes were intense. I need you to perform strength, Elena. I need anyone watching to believe you're exactly where you want to be, that you're protected, that touching you means answering to me. So I'm bait. You're my wife, which means you're the most valuable thing I have. He said it like a fact. And yes, people will test that. We'll try to see if you're a weakness. That's why Marcus and 2 others will be with you whenever you leave this building. Why I need to know where you are. Why this feels like a cage even though I'm trying to make it feel like freedom. Elena's hands were shaking. I didn't sign up for this. You signed up for protection. This is what protection looks like at my level. Victor moved closer, and his voice softened. I know it's a lot. I know you're overwhelmed, but I need you to trust that I won't let anything happen to you, that every restriction, every security measure, every moment I seem controlling, it's all aimed at keeping you alive. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough to be what you need? You're stronger than you think. You survived 3 years of hell before I intervened. You survived your aunt's death and debt collectors and being invisible to everyone around you. You can survive this. His hand came up to cup her face. And this time, you won't be doing it alone. Elena wanted to pull away but couldn't make herself move. What happens if someone does come after me? If your protection isn't enough? Victor's expression went dark. Then I make sure they regret it in ways that serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider it. I'm not a good man, Elena. I've done things that would make you run if you knew the details. But every bit of that violence, that ruthlessness, it's all at your disposal now. Anyone who hurts you answers to me, and I don't believe in proportional responses. The certainty in his voice should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel something close to safe. Like maybe the monster she'd married was her monster, and that made all the difference. I need time, she said, to process this, to figure out how to be what you need. You have time. We have 3 months, remember? His thumb brushed her cheekbone. But Elena, I need you to promise me something. What? If you're scared, if something feels wrong, if anyone approaches you who shouldn't, you tell me immediately. You don't handle it alone. You don't try to protect me by keeping secrets. You trust that I can handle whatever threat exists. Even if the threat is you, Victor's hand dropped. Especially then. If I ever make you feel unsafe, if I ever cross a line you can't accept, you tell me. Because this only works if you're honest with me about what you can and can't live with. Elena searched his face for signs of manipulation, for the control freak who'd orchestrated her life for 3 years. But all she saw was a man trying very hard to give her choices within a situation where real choice was impossible. Okay, she said finally, I'll tell you, but you have to do the same. No more secrets about what you've done to protect me. No more hiding things because you think I can't handle it. If we're doing this, if I'm really your wife, then I need to know what that means. All of it. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, full honesty. But Elena, some of what I've done, it's not pretty, it's not heroic, it's just pragmatic violence aimed at keeping you safe. Tell me anyway. He took a breath. The men who owned your aunt's debt, the ones who were planning to take you, I didn't just pay them off. Elena's blood ran cold. What did you do? I made sure they couldn't come back, that they couldn't sell the information they had on you to someone else, that the threat was eliminated completely and permanently. His voice was flat, emotionless. 3 of them are in prison on unrelated charges that I manufactured evidence for. 2 others left the country with enough money to start over somewhere that isn't here. And the last one, the one who'd been most vocal about what he wanted to do to you, he had an accident. An accident. A fatal one. In a way that couldn't be traced back to me. In a way that sent a message to anyone else who might have similar ideas. Victor's eyes were dark. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm not asking you to approve. I'm just telling you the truth. I killed a man who threatened you, and I'd do it again without hesitation. Elena couldn't breathe. The room felt too small, too hot. You're a murderer. I'm a man who protects what's his. Whether that makes me a murderer depends on your perspective. He didn't look away, didn't flinch. This is what I am, Elena. This is what you married. Someone who will do absolutely anything to keep you safe, including things that are morally indefensible. She should run, should call the police, should do literally anything except stand there processing the fact that the man she'd married had killed someone and was telling her about it like he was discussing the weather. But she couldn't stop thinking about those files, about secondary operations and what would have happened if Victor hadn't intervened, about the fact that she was alive and safe because he'd been willing to do things she couldn't even imagine. Do you regret it? She asked. No. Would you do it again? Yes, every time. Anyone who threatens you forfeits their right to my mercy. He moved closer. I need you to understand what you're protected by. Not just money or influence. Actual violence. The kind that solves problems permanently. If that's something you can't live with, tell me now, and we'll figure out how to end this marriage. But if you stay, you need to accept that this is part of the package. Elena's mind was racing. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. Good people didn't marry murderers. Good people didn't accept protection that came with a body count. But she'd never claimed to be good. She'd just claimed to want to survive. And survival in Victor's world apparently meant accepting that some threats were eliminated with extreme prejudice. I need to sit down, she said. Victor guided her to the chair, his hand steady on her back. Breathe. Just breathe. You killed someone for me. I killed someone who was planning to hurt you. There's a difference. Is there? Elena looked up at him. How do you live with it? How is that okay? It's not okay. It's necessary. Those are different things. He crouched in front of her, putting them at eye level. I'm not asking you to think I'm a hero. I'm asking you to understand that I'll do whatever it takes to protect you. And sometimes what it takes isn't noble or clean or legal. It's just effective. What if I can't accept that? Then we have a problem, because I can't change what I am. I can't promise I won't do it again if you're threatened. The only thing I can promise is that I'll be honest about it, that I won't hide who I am or what I'm capable of. His hands came up to frame her face. But Elena, you need to decide if you can live with that. If you can be married to someone who has blood on his hands. Because I won't lie to you about what I've done or what I'll do. Elena closed her eyes. This was the moment, the real choice. Not the wedding, not the 3 days of deliberation. This was where she decided if she could actually be Elena DeLuca. If she could accept protection that came with a body count. If she could love, because that's what this was building toward, wasn't it? A man who killed without remorse when it came to her safety. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know if I can do this. That's okay. You don't have to know right now. Victor's voice was gentle. Think about it. Process it. But Elena, while you're processing, remember that the alternative was you in that alley. You disappearing. You becoming someone's inventory. I killed a man who wanted to do that to you, and I'm not sorry. He stood and left the room, giving her space she desperately needed. Elena sat there for a long time, staring at her hands, at the ring that bound her to a murderer, to a man who'd watched her for 3 years and decided she was worth killing for. The smart thing would be to leave, to take the out he'd offered and disappear somewhere Victor's influence couldn't reach, to start over somewhere clean, somewhere without blood and obsession and choices that couldn't be unmade. But the smart thing had never been Elena's strong suit. And as she sat there processing the impossible, she realized something that should have terrified her, but instead felt oddly clarifying. She didn't want to leave, didn't want to go back to being invisible and alone, didn't want to trade Victor's dangerous protection for the uncertainty of the world outside. She wanted to stay, wanted to figure out how to be married to a man who'd killed for her, wanted to learn if safety and love could coexist with violence and control. She wanted to be Elena DeLuca, with all the complications that came with the name. Elena stood, walked to Victor's office, and knocked. When he opened the door, his expression was guarded, like he was bracing for rejection. I'm staying, she said. I'm not saying I'm okay with what you did. I'm not saying I understand it. But I'm staying. Because the alternative is worse. Because you've been honest about what you are. Because part of me thinks maybe I need someone who's willing to do terrible things to keep me safe. Victor's eyes closed briefly. You're sure? No. But I'm doing it anyway. Elena took a breath. But I need something from you. Name it. No more killing. Not unless there's absolutely no other option. I need to know you'll try every other solution first. Can you promise me that? Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I can promise I'll try. But if it comes down to your life or someone else's, I'm choosing you every time. That's not negotiable. I know, but try. For me. All right, I'll try. He pulled her into the office, and Elena was surprised to find it wasn't locked anymore. I have something for you. He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside were papers, legal documents that made Elena's head spin. What is this? The deed to your apartment, the one I had prepared for you. It's yours now. Legally, separate from this penthouse, separate from our marriage. If you ever want to leave, you have somewhere that's completely yours to go to. He set the papers in her hands. I promised you could leave after 3 months if you wanted. This makes sure you have the means to do it. Elena stared at the papers, at this evidence that Victor meant what he said, that he'd give her an escape even though it would destroy him. Why? She asked. Because I want you to stay by choice, not because you're trapped. Not because you don't have options. His hand covered hers. This marriage only works if you want to be here. If you choose me every day instead of just being stuck with me. Something in Elena's chest cracked open. This man, this dangerous, obsessive, controlling man, was giving her the tools to leave him, was making sure she had choices even in a situation where choice seemed impossible. You're not what I expected, she said softly. What did you expect? A monster, a villain, someone who took what he wanted without caring about the cost. Elena looked up at him. But you're more complicated than that. You're still controlling, still obsessive, still way too comfortable with violence. But you're also trying, and that matters more than I thought it would. Victor's expression was raw in a way she'd never seen. I'm terrified you'll leave. I've been terrified since the moment I met you that I'd do something to drive you away. That my obsession would be too much, that you'd see what I really am and run. I can see what you are. I'm still here. For now. But 3 months is a long time. A lot can go wrong. Elena set the papers down and took his hands. Then we figure it out together. Isn't that what you said? That we'd figure this out as partners? I say a lot of things. Doesn't mean I'm good at following through. Then learn. Because I'm staying, Victor. I'm scared and confused and probably making a huge mistake. But I'm staying, and I'm going to need you to meet me halfway, to actually try to be a partner instead of just a protector. Victor pulled her closer until she was standing between his knees and his hands were on her waist. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. You keep saying that like it's simple. It's not simple, but it's the only option that doesn't end with one of us miserable. Elena touched his face, and he leaned into her hand like he'd been starving for the contact. Tell me something. When you watched me for 3 years, what did you actually see? Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I saw someone who refused to break, who got knocked down every day and still got back up, who was invisible to everyone else but impossible to ignore once you really looked. I saw strength disguised as survival. I saw you, Elena, and once I saw you, I couldn't look away. That's not the girl in the bakery. That's who you wanted me to be. No, that's who you were all along. You just couldn't see it because you were too busy surviving. His hands tightened on her waist. I'm not going to apologize for seeing you better than you saw yourself, for recognizing what you were capable of before you did. That's still controlling. Maybe. But it's also true. He pulled her down until she was sitting in his lap, and Elena went because fighting felt pointless. 3 months. We have 3 months to figure out if this works. If we can be partners instead of captor and captive. If you can love someone like me, and I can be someone worth loving. Elena rested her head against his shoulder. What if we can't? Then we tried, and you leave with my blessing and enough money to start over, and I spend the rest of my life regretting that I couldn't be what you needed. That's depressing. That's honest. His hand came up to stroke her hair. But I'm hoping it doesn't come to that. I'm hoping 3 months from now you'll want to stay. Not because you're trapped, not because you're scared, but because you've decided I'm worth keeping. Elena closed her eyes and let herself be held. This was insane. All of it. She was married to a man who'd stalked her and killed for her and controlled her life with a precision that should have been terrifying. But sitting here in his arms, feeling safe for the first time in years, she couldn't make herself regret it. I'm going to hold you to that partnership thing, she said. No more making decisions without me. No more controlling everything. We figure things out together or this doesn't work. Agreed. But you have to hold up your end too. No keeping secrets about being scared or overwhelmed. No pretending you're fine when you're not. We're honest with each other or this falls apart. Deal. They sat there for a long time, wrapped around each other, while the city hummed below and their future waited to be written. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even healthy, probably. But it was theirs. This strange marriage of necessity and obsession and something that might eventually turn into love if they worked hard enough. 3 months. They had 3 months to figure it out. 3 months to see if Victor could be a partner instead of a controller. 3 months for Elena to decide if being seen was worth the cost of freedom. 3 months to turn a cage into a home. But sitting there in his arms, Elena thought maybe they had a chance. Maybe two broken people could build something that worked, even if it didn't look like anyone else's definition of normal. Maybe safety and choice could coexist if they were both willing to try. Victor, she said quietly. Yeah? Thank you. For the apartment. For the honesty. For trying. His arms tightened around her. Thank you for staying. For giving me a chance. For not running when you had every reason to. I might still run. I know. But you're here now. That's enough. Elena lifted her head to look at him. Kiss me. Victor's eyes went dark. Why? Because I'm your wife. Because I want to. Because I need to know if this can be more than just protection, an obligation. She touched his face. Kiss me like you mean it. Like this is real. He didn't make her ask twice. His mouth came down on hers with a hunger that had been building for 3 years. And Elena kissed him back because she wanted to, because she was choosing this, because she was done being passive in her own life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. That was real, Elena finished. That felt real. It was always real for me, from the first moment. His hands cupped her face. I know this started wrong. I know I controlled and manipulated and did things that no sane person would accept. But Elena, what I feel for you, that's the realest thing in my life. That's what all of this is built on. I'm not there yet. I'm not ready to say I love you or that this is forever. But I'm trying. I'm here. And I want this to work. That's more than I deserve. Probably. But you're getting it anyway. Elena stood, holding out her hand. Come on. Show me the rest of this place. If I'm going to be Elena DeLuca, I should probably know what that means. Victor took her hand and led her through the penthouse, explaining things she'd missed, showing her the security systems and the safe room and the arsenal he kept in a locked cabinet that made her stomach turn but didn't surprise her. He showed her the closet full of clothes Margaret had selected, designers Elena couldn't pronounce, fabrics that felt like silk and cost like cars. He showed her the study where she could work if she wanted to go back to school, the gym where she could learn to defend herself, the kitchen where a chef could be hired if she didn't want to cook. He showed her his world and made space for her in it, made it clear that being his wife meant having access to everything he had, meant being protected and provided for, and seen in a way she'd never experienced. It was overwhelming. It was too much, but it was also hers if she wanted it. That night, Elena made dinner in the ridiculous kitchen while Victor worked in his office. It was simple, pasta and vegetables, nothing fancy. But when she called him to eat, he looked at the table like she'd prepared a feast. You cooked, he said. I used to cook all the time, before money got too tight. I missed it. This is... Victor sat down heavily. No one's ever cooked for me before, not like this, not just because they wanted to. Elena sat across from him. Get used to it. If we're doing this partnership thing, I'm contributing more than just existing in your space. I'm going to cook sometimes. I'm going to have opinions about how this place is run. I'm going to be an actual person in this marriage, instead of just someone you protect. Victor's smile was slow and genuine. I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. They ate in comfortable silence, and after, they cleaned up together. It was domestic and strange, and felt more like being married than the ceremony had. Later, when Elena retreated to her room, Victor stopped her with a hand on her arm. Will you? He stopped, looking uncertain in a way that made him seem younger. Would you stay with me tonight? Not for... I sleep better when you're close, and I've waited 3 years to fall asleep knowing you're safe in my arms. Elena should say no, should keep the boundaries clear. But she looked at his face, at the vulnerability he was showing her, and found she didn't want to say no. Okay, but just sleeping. Just sleeping, I promise. His room was massive, and the bed was even more obscene than hers. Elena climbed in wearing the pajamas Margaret had provided while Victor changed in the bathroom, and when he came out in just sleep pants, she tried not to stare at the scars on his chest and arms that told stories she wasn't ready to hear. He slid into bed beside her, careful to leave space, but Elena closed the distance, curled against his side because if she was doing this, she was doing it all the way. Victor's arm came around her automatically, and his voice was rough when he spoke. Thank you. For what? For this. For trying. For being here. He pressed a kiss to her hair. For not giving up on me even though you have every reason to. Don't make me regret it. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you don't. Elena closed her eyes and let herself relax against him. Tomorrow they'd figure out more of what this marriage meant. Tomorrow there would be challenges and arguments and moments where she'd want to run. Tomorrow, the reality of being Elena DeLuca would become clearer, harder, more complicated. But tonight, she was just a girl being held by someone who'd built his entire world around keeping her safe. Someone who'd waited 3 years for this moment. Someone who was trying, against every instinct he had, to be a partner instead of a controller. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And as sleep pulled her under, Elena thought that maybe, just maybe, she could build something real from this impossible beginning. Maybe she could take the cage he'd built and transform it into something else, something they'd built together. Maybe being Elena DeLuca wouldn't be a prison after all. Maybe it would be coming home. She fell asleep with that thought, wrapped in Victor's arms, and for the first time in 3 years of his watching, she let herself be seen completely. Let herself be vulnerable. Let herself trust that the man holding her would keep his promises. 3 months would tell. 3 months would show them if this could work, if obsession could transform into love, if control could soften into partnership, if two broken people could build something whole. But Elena was done running from difficult things, done being invisible, done pretending she didn't want to be seen, to be claimed, to belong somewhere. She wanted to be Elena DeLuca, wanted to learn what that meant, wanted to see if the cage could become a home and the monster could become hers. And when Victor's arms tightened around her in sleep, when he murmured her name like a prayer, Elena smiled into the darkness and thought that maybe she already had her answer. Maybe she'd had it all along. She just needed time to accept it. 3 months. They had 3 months. But Elena suspected she wouldn't need nearly that long to decide. She was already home.